The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the naval base's training ground into a slick, reflective mess of mud and puddles. Each raindrop hit like a drumbeat, echoing through the empty corridors and training fields. Emma Lawson pulled the hood of her black tactical jacket tighter over her head, her hair plastered to her temples. The storm didn't faze her. She had weathered worse. At 29, Emma was older than most of the recruits. Most of them were fresh out of college, their bodies lean but untested in the crucible of true combat. But she had something they didn't: years of private security work in volatile environments overseas, and a mind honed for observation, anticipation, and silence. That experience didn't matter much here, at least. That's what the instructors thought. The training officer, a grizzled veteran with a jagged scar over his left eye, blew the whistle. "Move, let's see what you're made of." His voice cut through the storm, commanding attention. Emma adjusted the strap on her utility belt, feeling the familiar weight of the sidearm and tactical knife. She didn't run. She moved. Each step was deliberate, her feet sliding silently over wet mud, her body low, shadowed by the dark clouds overhead. The other recruits darted forward, shouting to one another, their boots splashing in puddles. A pair of SEAL trainees sneered at Emma as she stepped onto the field, her gaze steady, calm. "You sure you're in the right unit, rookie?" one burly man asked, his voice dripping with mockery. His eyes scanned her small frame, trying to measure her against the brute force he was accustomed to seeing. Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. Every fiber of her being was focused on observation, noting cover positions, predicting the enemy's approach, calculating angles, reading patterns. She was aware of every droplet of rain, every shadow that shifted across the wet ground, every flicker of movement among the other recruits. The exercise was simple in theory: navigate the training course, locate the objective, and neutralize the threat. In practice, chaos erupted immediately. Smoke grenades hissed and detonated, their acrid plumes curling around walls. Bullets zipped past from instructors aiming to simulate hostile fire. Recruits yelled orders, panicked, or froze in place. Emma didn't panic. She slid behind a low wall, pressed herself against it, and peeked through the smoke. Her movements were quiet, almost imperceptible as she analyzed every angle. A nearby recruit stumbled, mud spraying into the air, his yelp piercing through the rain. Emma's eyes followed him, anticipating where he would fall, calculating the next step. Then, with a controlled exhale, she moved. Across the field, over debris, ducking under a swinging chain barrier, she advanced like a shadow. No one noticed her. Not the instructors, not the other trainees, not even the SEALs who were observing the exercise. When she reached the objective, a simulated hostage in a small, dimly lit building, she had done so silently. A swift, precise disarm of the guard, followed by a quick check to ensure the hostage's safety, and she was ready for extraction. The whistle blew, signaling the end of the exercise. One by one, the recruits emerged, muddy, soaked, and panting. They had fought, struggled, and struggled some more. But Emma stepped out last, composed, almost serene. Her uniform was wet and muddy, but she carried herself with the calm assurance of someone who had already won. The SEAL commander, a tall man with an imposing presence and a reputation for ruthlessness, furrowed his brow. He had been observing the entire field with his binoculars, expecting to see chaos, mistakes, struggle. Instead, he saw Emma, alone, standing where no one should have been. How did she? His voice trailed off. He didn't finish. Even he couldn't articulate it. Emma had moved through the exercise unseen, untouched, and had completed every objective flawlessly. Not a single person had noticed her approach, her maneuvers, or her strategy. The other recruits stared at her, a mixture of awe, confusion, and resentment. One of the younger trainees, barely 21, muttered under his breath, "She's like a ghost." Emma didn't respond. She had learned long ago that attention was a distraction. Focus was everything. And right now, Focus meant staying calm, staying invisible, and observing the reactions of everyone around her. The seals began whispering among themselves, unable to mask their curiosity. "Who is she?" one asked. "Where did she come from?" Emma's gaze swept across the field, landing briefly on the commander. She noticed the faint tension in his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed slightly in calculation. He was assessing her potential, weighing the risk and reward of someone who operated entirely outside the expected parameters of the team. As she walked toward the exit of the training ground, her boots leaving muted impressions in the mud, a seal finally spoke aloud. "If she's this good now, what happens when it's real combat?" Emma didn't hear him. She was already thinking about the next challenge. She knew that today had been a test of stealth and strategy, but tomorrow would demand more: endurance, resilience, adaptability. And she was ready. She glanced over her shoulder one last time. The rain fell harder now, drenching the field in a relentless curtain of water. Shadows danced across the training ground, but none of them were hers. Emma had become something else entirely, a shadow within shadows, a presence that no one could anticipate. And as the seals filed out, still debating what they had just witnessed, Emma disappeared into the perimeter of the base, moving with a quiet confidence that unsettled even the most seasoned veterans. Her mind was already running through contingencies, escape routes, and infiltration tactics. The SEALs didn't yet know her, didn't yet understand her capabilities, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The storm raged on, and with it, a new force had emerged in the shadows of the naval base. Emma Lawson, unseen, untouchable, and ready to redefine everything they thought they knew about stealth, skill, and survival. "Suspense hook," one of the observing SEALs muttered almost under his breath. "If she's this good now, what happens when it's real combat?" And in the distance, the darkened outline of the training ground seemed almost alive, waiting for the next shadow to move. The night fell over the training city like a velvet curtain, heavy and suffocating. Rain from the previous day had left streets slick and reflective, neon signs flickering in puddles like ghostly signals. Emma Lawson crouched atop a crumbling rooftop, her eyes scanning the maze of alleyways, stairwells, and abandoned buildings. She had been sent ahead of the SEAL team as an advanced recon operator, a ghost in the urban labyrinth, tasked with mapping every danger and ensuring that the mission could proceed without casualties. The SEALs didn't know she was there. Not yet. They had been briefed that intelligence suggested hostile operatives were holed up in the area, but no one had anticipated the precision and subtlety of Emma's infiltration. She had already disabled 2 security cameras with barely a whisper of sound, and had maneuvered past a trio of patrolling guards without leaving a footprint. Every movement was deliberate, every step calculated. The wet metal of the fire escape sang a quiet note beneath her fingers as she pulled herself up, muscles taut, senses alert. A stray cat hissed below and she froze, letting her shadow merge completely with the darkness. She could hear the faint murmur of voices from the street, 2 men arguing in a language she didn't recognize. She observed, noting the cadence, the tension, and the probable patrol routes that would follow. Emma's mind worked like a master chess player, anticipating moves, reactions, and contingencies. A flash of movement caught her eye, an enemy operative rounding a corner. Instinctively, she dropped to a lower ledge, letting the figure pass mere inches above her head. They never noticed her. From her vantage point, she could see the main target, a fortified warehouse at the end of the alley. Her assignment was reconnaissance, not engagement, but instinct told her to prepare. Preparing meant anticipating every trap, every guard, every variable. She slid into a shadowed doorway, pressing her back against the cold brick, listening. Inside the warehouse, voices echoed faintly, distorted by concrete and metal. 2 operatives argued in hushed tones, checking blueprints and equipment. Emma crouched low, inching forward with the precision of a predator. Every footstep was silent, every motion measured. She disabled a tripwire, noted the positions of guards, and sketched mental maps of the building's interior. Suddenly she heard it, a soft footstep behind her. Emma froze, every nerve alert. A seal, another operative. She spun, knife ready, only to see a stray crate wobble in the wind. Her breath remained steady, her pulse quiet. She had trained for this in conditions far worse, in places far more hostile. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, a burst of static over the SEAL's radio. "Emma, status." The voice of Lieutenant Harris was cautious, controlled. She whispered into her mic, keeping her eyes on the windows of the warehouse. "Position secured. No movement detected. Proceed with caution." The team didn't know she was already inside the building's perimeter, observing, neutralizing potential threats before they even reached her. Every footfall they took was already accounted for. Every trap they might trigger had been disarmed. The first operative stepped outside, unaware that a shadow had already shifted behind him. A swift, silent movement, a chokehold, a quiet tap on the shoulder, and he was down before he even had a chance to shout. Emma dragged him behind a stack of crates, leaving him slumped against the wall, unconscious but unharmed. A second operative approached, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Emma melted into the shadows, using the dim light to her advantage. The man stopped, squinting, sensing something, but it was too late. A precise strike to the wrist sent his weapon clattering across the floor. He staggered, reaching for his radio, but Emma was already there, disarming and immobilizing him with fluid, controlled movements. By the time the SEALs reached the warehouse, all threats had been neutralized. Doors unlocked, corridors cleared, hostages secured. They moved in as a team, guns raised, eyes wide, expecting resistance. What they found instead was calm, silence, and shadows that didn't move. Lieutenant Harris paused, scanning the empty rooms. Where is she?" His voice was hushed, disbelief lacing every word. Emma stepped from the shadows, wet hair plastered to her face, uniform darkened by rain but unmarked. She carried herself with calm authority, like someone who had already seen the worst and emerged unscathed. The SEAL's eyes widened. They had trained for stealth, for tactical precision, for calculated risk, but nothing they had experienced compared to what they had just witnessed. Emma had moved undetected through hostile territory, neutralizing threats with speed and efficiency they hadn't even imagined possible. "Ghost," one SEAL muttered, shaking his head. "That's what she is, a ghost." Emma didn't respond. She moved past them, checking the hostages, ensuring their safety. The SEALs followed, all mixed with suspicion. How could someone operate so independently, so perfectly? And most unnerving of all, they hadn't even seen her until it was over. The commander, watching from a distance, clenched his jaw. He was a man accustomed to control, to knowing every variable on the battlefield. Emma was an unknown, and the unknown was a dangerous thing. She finished her checks and signaled over the radio, "Mission secure, no casualties, extraction point clear." The SEALs approached cautiously. You did all of this alone?" one asked, incredulous. Emma's green eyes met his, calm, steady, unreadable. "I was here," she said simply, "all along." A low murmur rippled through the team. They had trained together, fought together, and yet they had never seen anyone move with such unseen efficiency. Every sense of security they had relied upon had been disrupted by someone they hadn't even realized was present. Emma moved back toward the extraction point, her boots barely making a sound on the wet pavement. Behind her, the SEALs whispered among themselves. "If she's this good now," one said, voice low and tense, "what happens when it's real combat?" The night swallowed her as she disappeared into the shadows, leaving only questions, unease, and a lingering sense of awe. No one had touched her. No one had even noticed her until the mission was complete. She had become the ultimate variable, a force moving unseen, unpredictable, unstoppable. And as the city lights reflected off the rain-soaked streets, Emma's silhouette melted into the darkness, a whisper against the chaos of the world. She was ready for the next challenge. The SEALs didn't know it yet, but nothing about the mission or the battlefield would ever feel the same again. Suspense hook. Somewhere in the city, someone was watching. A faint shadow flitted along a rooftop, unseen by the team below. Emma's actions had not gone unnoticed, and this watcher had their own agenda, one that could change everything. The gym smelled of sweat, gun oil, and rubber mats. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead, casting long, sharp shadows across the training floor. Emma Lawson stood at the entrance, her jacket zipped tight, her eyes scanning the room. Today was different. Today wasn't a simulated mission. Today was a test designed by the SEAL commander himself. 3 of the unit's most elite SEALs were waiting inside. Men who had survived combat tour, knife fights in alleys, and midnight raids in hostile territories. They were the pinnacle of tactical training, strength, and lethal efficiency. And they were tasked with hunting her. Alone. The commander's voice echoed through the PA system. This is a stealth challenge. No guns, hand-to-hand only. The objective, neutralize all opponents and remain undetected until completion. Commence. Emma exhaled slowly. This was a chance to prove herself beyond observation and ghost-like recon. She was ready. Immediately, the 3 men fanned out, moving with practiced precision. Their eyes swept the floor, anticipating movement, analyzing angles, predicting exits. Emma crouched low, letting the shadows swallow her form. Her heartbeat was calm, even under the adrenaline surge. Every sound, every flicker of light, every breath in the room was catalogued in her mind. A SEAL lunged toward a stack of crates. Emma anticipated his movement. With a single fluid motion, she rolled out of sight, her hand snaking to a nearby pipe. She struck with precision, a controlled tap that sent the man sprawling, disoriented but unharmed. Another approached from the opposite corner. Emma held her breath as he scanned the room, flashlight slicing through darkness. She moved along the wall, silent, keeping her body pressed to shadows. A swift maneuver, a subtle trip of his foot, and he crashed into a padded wall, tumbling in confusion. The 3rd SEAL was smarter, faster. He paused, sensing her presence. "She's here," he muttered, and suddenly the room seemed smaller, the shadows more crowded, the tension palpable. Emma's pulse didn't rise. She thrived in this environment. She spun, using momentum to deliver a controlled strike that incapacitated him momentarily. He stumbled, recovered, but Emma had already melted back into darkness, repositioning herself for another strike. Every move was calculated, almost choreographed, as though she and the shadows were one entity. The SEALs regrouped, their expressions a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Where is she?" one hissed, scanning frantically. "She's right here," another shouted, but no one saw her. She was a phantom, a ghost in the room. Emma advanced methodically, neutralizing each SEAL in turn with precision strikes that left them dazed but unharmed. The sounds of scuffling echoed, but she remained untouched. The men tried to predict her moves, tried to anticipate her strikes, but Emma's mind operated several steps ahead. She could read their intentions, detect micro-expressions, notice the slightest shifts in weight. Finally, after several intense minutes, all 3 elite operators lay on the mats, stunned and disoriented. Emma adjusted her gloves, brushing a streak of sweat from her brow. Calm, composed, and utterly untouchable, she stood over them. The commander entered, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. "How?" He paused, struggling to form words. "Explain." Emma's voice was steady. "You taught me well." The SEALs groaned, frustrated by the precision and efficiency of a single operator against 3 of their own best. One muttered bitterly, "She's not just good, she's unreal." But in the corner of the gym, a shadow moved. One SEAL, who had been observing Emma during her previous exercises, had recorded the entire challenge. His eyes gleamed with calculation, a plan forming in his mind. He had seen her move, noted her strategies, and now held the key to exposing, manipulating, or testing her in ways no one else could predict. Emma sensed the tension in the room, the mixture of awe and suspicion. It was the first time she realized the challenge wasn't only physical, it was psychological. She had won the test of stealth and skill, but the undercurrents of doubt, envy, and curiosity surrounding her presence were just as significant. The commander shook his head, finally speaking. "You've exceeded every expectation, but know this. This unit is not forgiving. We operate as one. Unpredictable independence can be as dangerous as the enemy." Emma nodded, silently acknowledging the warning. She had come prepared for the physical tests, but the political and interpersonal dynamics of the SEAL team were another battlefield entirely. As she moved toward the exit, one of the men groaned, sitting up. How are you even human?" Emma paused, looking back, a faint smirk crossing her face. "I've learned to survive," she said softly, voice barely audible over the sound of dripping water from the ceiling. "And being human isn't always enough." She left the gym quietly, the echoes of astonishment and frustration trailing behind her. The recording in the corner, however, told a different story. Someone had documented every move, every strike, every silent step she had taken. Emma didn't notice it yet, but the footage could become a tool or a weapon, depending on who wielded it. Outside, the storm had returned, winds whipping against the naval base's perimeter. Emma's silhouette merged with the darkness, her movements almost imperceptible. The SEALs would talk about her for weeks, speculating, theorizing, trying to decipher how a single operator could neutralize 3 elite men without detection. The lesson was clear. Emma Lawson was not just a recruit. She was a force that defied prediction, a ghost in the shadows, a threat that couldn't be anticipated. And though she had proven her skill, the test had only just begun. There were unknowns ahead, missions that would push her beyond stealth, beyond control, beyond what the SEALs thought possible. As she vanished into the night, one of the younger SEALs whispered, almost fearfully, "She's like nothing we've ever trained for or fought with." Emma's eyes scanned the horizon, alert to every shadow, every movement, every whisper in the night. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting, and recording. Her own actions had attracted attention, and attention could be dangerous. She moved silently across the roofline, disappearing into the darkness, a phantom in the night. The SEALs had not seen her coming, and for them the question lingered. When she operates in real combat, will anyone know she's there before it's over? Suspense hook. From a distant rooftop, the glint of a camera lens caught a faint reflection. Someone had been documenting her movements. Emma didn't know it yet, but she was no longer invisible to the outside world. And the consequences of being seen, even partially, could be deadly. The call came at 300 hours. Emma Lawson was halfway through her rest cycle when the emergency alert blared across the naval base. A high-profile terrorist had taken refuge in a remote compound in the desert outskirts. Lives were at stake, and intelligence was limited. The SEAL commander's voice crackled over the secure line. "Lawson, we're going in. You're our advance operative, entirely off the books. Go silent, confirm the target, ensure no hostages are harmed. Understand?" Emma acknowledged, her voice calm, controlled. "Understood, I'm on my way." By 400, she was on a transport helicopter, the wind cutting through the open hatch. Darkness stretched endlessly before her, punctuated only by the dim glow of distant compound lights. Her team, officially the SEAL unit, was behind her, unaware that she had already begun her plan. They thought she would follow standard protocol. She never did. She exited the helicopter first, parachuting into the perimeter, landing lightly on sand with barely a whisper. Her boots sank slightly, but she adjusted, moving like liquid through the shadows. The compound appeared from the darkness like a fortress carved into the earth. Walls were high, sensors strategically placed, armed guards patrolling with deadly precision. Emma melted into the terrain, scouting from the dunes. She observed patrol patterns, security rotations, and infrared cameras. She had seconds to decide each move, but instinct guided her. every muscle coiled for action, every sense heightened. A guard emerged, sweeping his flashlight across the sand. Emma dropped into the nearest shadow, her body pressing against a large rock. The light passed inches from her face. She exhaled slowly, letting the seconds stretch, feeling the adrenaline spike but remain controlled. The guard moved on, unaware of her presence. Inside the compound, she detected movement, a secondary target, perhaps a decoy. Her mind cataloged every possible contingency. Hostages could be present, traps could be hidden. Every step required calculation, not aggression. Emma approached a service hatch, low and silent, removing a small set of tools from her pack. In minutes, she had disabled the electronic lock and removed the alarm triggers, leaving no trace. The SEALs, meanwhile, were advancing from the front gate, unaware that she had already breached the inner perimeter. The hallways were dark, the air tense with the scent of dust and machinery. Emma's footsteps were imperceptible. She moved past a cluster of guards chatting near a stairwell. Using a controlled chokehold, one by one, she neutralized them and dragged them into a storage closet, ensuring their silence. Her pulse was steady. Focus was absolute. Every detail mattered: shadows, angles, enemy reactions. The SEALs called over radio, unaware she had already reached the compound's core. "Lawson, status," Lieutenant Harris's voice crackled. She responded softly, "Target located. Hostage status unknown. Proceed with caution." Emma pressed forward, now inside the control room. Screens flickered, showing the exterior of the compound. Cameras she had just disabled were now offline. She checked the files, gathering intelligence for the SEALs. The terrorists' plans were laid bare before her, but the situation was complicated. An armed operative had stationed himself near a hostage. Emma didn't hesitate. She moved silently through the ventilation shaft, positioning herself directly above the guard. She timed her descent with the precision of a hawk, landing behind him in the narrow corridor. One swift movement, a controlled strike, and he collapsed silently. She tied him, leaving him out of view from cameras. The hostages were hidden in an inner room. Emma approached, her breath shallow but controlled. She unlocked the door, ensuring they remained calm, whispering instructions to stay low and silent. Every second mattered. The SEALs were still outside the main gate, expecting resistance. Emma's presence ensured that the threat was neutralized before they arrived. Every patrol she had mapped, every alarm she had disabled, every guard she had subdued, everything had cleared the path. By the time the SEALs stormed the compound, the hostages were secure and the terrorists were incapacitated. The team's astonishment was immediate. Lieutenant Harris burst into the control room, eyes wide. "How? She's already here. How did?" Emma stepped out of the shadows, her uniform damp with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. Calm, composed, unshaken. The SEALs could not comprehend it. Not only had she moved undetected through hostile territory, she had neutralized threats and secured the hostages without a single shot fired. One veteran whispered to another, incredulous, "She's unreal. That was impossible." Emma merely nodded at the hostages, ensuring they were safe, then turned her attention back to the SEALs. "Everything's clear," she said. "Extraction point secure." The SEALs, trained to anticipate, to strategize, and to dominate, were left in awe and disbelief. She had operated ahead of them, unseen and untouchable, rewriting every assumption they had about operational tactics. But something gnawed at Emma. She felt it instinctively. Another presence, movement she hadn't accounted for. She froze, scanning the dim interior. A flicker of shadow, subtle and deliberate, caught her eye. Someone else was inside the compound, not a terrorist, not a SEAL, someone observing, waiting. Her heartbeat accelerated, but her composure remained intact. She wasn't alone. An instinct told her that this observer was no ordinary operative. The danger wasn't immediate, but it was present. The SEALs, oblivious to this new threat, were debriefing, reviewing the data and congratulating themselves on a mission supposedly executed perfectly. Emma didn't join them. She moved silently through the corridors, keeping the shadow in her peripheral vision. She didn't yet know who it was, but one thing was certain. Someone had been watching her every move. As she exited the compound, slipping back into the desert night, the wind carried a faint whisper. Somewhere in the distance, movement reflected off the sand dunes, a figure retreating, camera glinting faintly. Emma's green eyes narrowed. Whoever it was, they weren't done. She melted into the darkness, unseen, unheard, and untraceable. But the message was clear. She had not only infiltrated a high-security compound alone, she had also attracted the attention of someone who would not reveal themselves lightly. The SEALs, finally arriving at the extraction point, were puzzled. "She's not here," Lieutenant Harris muttered, scanning the perimeter. Emma had vanished, leaving only traces of her presence and a trail of unanswered questions. Suspense hook. Somewhere beyond the dunes in the shadows, someone had captured every move she made. And Emma realized for the first time that being unseen was only the beginning. The next challenge would be survival, not against the enemy, but against those who now knew she existed. The desert night was silent, save for the whisper of the wind across the sand dunes. Emma Lawson crouched on a ridge overlooking the compound she had just secured. Her breaths were slow, deliberate, controlled, each one a silent drumbeat of focus. The SEALs had left, satisfied that the mission had gone according to plan, or at least, according to the plan they had been briefed on. But Emma wasn't satisfied. Something wasn't right. Her instincts, honed over years of working in hostile territories and high-risk operations, screamed at her. She was being watched. It started subtly. A glint of light reflected from a high vantage point, almost like a star caught in the corner of her vision. She froze, heart steady but senses on high alert. The shadows shifted in ways that didn't belong to the natural landscape. Someone else had been inside the compound with her. Someone who had observed every move, every calculated strike, every silent maneuver she had executed. Emma's mind raced. If the person was only observing, she could neutralize them quietly. If they were armed or trained like her, this could become deadly. She scanned the horizon, every detail catalogued in an instant. The wind direction, the angle of the moonlight, the subtle depression of the sand where someone might crouch. Then she saw it, a faint blinking device half buried in the sand. Her pulse remained calm, but a flicker of awareness surged through her. It was a tracker, small and sophisticated, almost impossible to detect without experience. Someone had been following her every step. Someone had known exactly where she was inside the compound. Emma pressed her back against the dune, considering her options. She couldn't allow the tracker to remain. It was a direct line to her location, her movements, and potentially her team. She removed a small multi-tool from her belt, precision work her only ally. Within moments, the device was disabled, crushed, and buried under sand, leaving no trace. But the danger wasn't neutralized. She had learned one undeniable truth in the field. Being observed meant the observer was capable, patient, and calculating. Whoever had placed that tracker wasn't just a threat. They were a predator, studying her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Emma moved silently back toward the perimeter of the compound, keeping low, shadows her only cover. The SEALs were still unaware. They believed the mission had gone smoothly. They would never know the full picture, the intricacies of her infiltration, the subtle traps she had disarmed, or the fact that someone else had been tracking her from inside. Inside the compound's control room, Emma paused. She reviewed the logs of cameras she had disabled, noting small anomalies, glitches that were too precise to be random. Someone had tampered with the system, likely to test her reactions or study her capabilities. She realized with a twinge of unease that this wasn't just a threat, it was a challenge. And challenges, if underestimated, could be deadly. She moved with fluid precision, retracing her earlier path. Every hallway, every shadow, every ventilation shaft was familiar. She slipped through them with the ease of a ghost, senses attuned to the smallest irregularity. A faint scuff, a whisper of movement, a shadow that lingered too long, she noted them all. Then it happened. A sudden motion behind a partially open door. Emma froze, knife in hand. A figure stepped into the dim light, silhouette sleek, movement controlled, almost predatory. They were fast, silent, trained, dangerous. Emma recognized immediately that this wasn't a novice operative. This was someone who had been inside the compound, who had been observing her every move. The two circled each other, tension taut in the air. Breaths were measured, eyes locked, muscles coiled like springs. Neither spoke, neither blinked. Every instinct screamed for precision, for timing, for control. The first strike came without warning, a blur of motion, a flash of steel. Emma met it with counter-movement, twisting, dodging, using momentum to redirect force. The other operative was skilled, fast, and relentless. But Emma's experience in combat, stealth, and anticipation gave her the edge. Every strike was calculated, every dodge precise. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Each move, each counter-move, was a dance of survival and supremacy. Neither made a sound beyond the muffled impacts of bodies and the faint scrape of clothing against concrete. Emma's mind raced through every possible scenario, anticipating the opponent's next move, predicting weaknesses, and exploiting them with clinical precision. Finally, a decisive move. Emma used the operative's momentum against them, spinning, twisting, and landing a precise strike that incapacitated her opponent without permanent harm. They crumpled to the floor, breathing shallow, eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Emma stood over them, knife at the ready, chest steady, pulse controlled. The realization hit her. This wasn't just a threat, it was a message. Someone powerful, skilled, and patient was aware of her presence. They had tested her, tracked her, and perhaps even admired her capability. But admiration was irrelevant when survival was at stake. She tied the operative, ensuring they remained quiet and out of sight. Then, slipping into the shadows, she exited the compound as silently as she had entered. The SEALs arrived moments later, unaware of the confrontation, unaware that a highly trained adversary had been inside, waiting. Lieutenant Harris muttered in disbelief, scanning the perimeter. How could she be gone? We just saw her, she secured the hostages. Where did she go? Emma had vanished, leaving only traces of her actions, the subdued operative, the secured hostages, and the disabled systems. She melted into the desert night, aware that being unseen was no longer enough. She had been tracked, studied, and tested. The enemy knew she existed, and now she had to anticipate the next move. The wind carried a faint whisper through the dunes. Emma's green eyes narrowed. Whoever had set the tracker and waited was still out there. She had neutralized the immediate threat, but the predator remained. This was no longer a mission of observation or infiltration. It had become a game of survival, skill, and anticipation against someone who was just as clever, just as patient, and just as deadly as she was. Suspense hook. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the compound walls, a figure watched from a distance. A camera glinted faintly in the moonlight. They had seen everything, and they were smiling. Emma Lawson had survived tonight, but the real test was only beginning. The base was quiet, almost eerily so, as Emma Lawson returned from the desert mission. The storm of the previous nights had cleared, leaving a crisp, cold wind that bit at exposed skin. The SEALs were buzzing with adrenaline and adrenaline-fueled stories of the mission, but something was off. The tension in the air was palpable, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. Emma moved through the corridors, silent and deliberate, each step calculated to draw no attention, but eyes followed her. Whispers floated just out of earshot. Not all of it was curiosity or admiration, some carried suspicion. She had proven herself repeatedly, yet the more the SEALs saw of her capabilities, the more they questioned them. Then came the revelation. A video surfaced on a secure internal channel. One of the SEALs who had been assigned to monitor her during previous exercises had leaked footage to an external contractor. The footage captured every detail. Emma moving through shadowed corridors, disabling threats, neutralizing adversaries, securing hostages, everything she had done during her stealth operations. The leak sent shockwaves through the unit. Commanders gathered, faces grim. The SEALs whispered among themselves. How could someone so capable, so independent be trusted? Emma had never sought recognition, but now scrutiny had found her. She entered the debriefing room calm as ever, aware of the tension she carried on her shoulders without realizing it. The commander's eyes were sharp, reading every expression, every microreaction. "Lawson," he said slowly, "we have a situation. Someone has documented your operations without authorization. We don't know their intentions, and now there's a concern about your independence." Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. Independence had always been her strength, yet now it had become a source of suspicion. "I did my missions to protect lives, not to follow hierarchy," she replied. Her voice was calm, unwavering. "If I can prevent casualties and secure the objectives, isn't that the point?" A junior SEAL sneered under his breath, clearly uncomfortable with her defiance. "You operate like a ghost," he muttered, "but ghosts don't answer to anyone. What happens if you decide we're the enemy?" Emma's green eyes flicked to him, a quiet intensity in her gaze. "I answer to results, and every mission I've completed proves that." But the unease didn't dissipate. The video had spread beyond internal channels. Someone had seen it, and the implications were serious. Emma understood that her actions, her excellence, had drawn attention from forces that weren't part of the unit. Contractors, intelligence operatives, and perhaps adversaries had noted her. She had become a variable in a system that wasn't designed to handle unpredictability. As night fell, Emma returned to her quarters. A knock sounded at the door, sharp, deliberate. No one had come to visit her before. She approached cautiously, senses on high alert, hand hovering near her tactical knife. On the doorstep was a sealed envelope, thick and unmarked, heavy with the weight of unknown intent. She picked it up, carefully opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in precise, deliberate strokes. "We know who you are. We've seen what you can do. Meet us at the coordinates, midnight, alone." No signature, no indication of friend or foe, just a challenge, a summons, and an unmistakable warning. Emma's mind raced. This wasn't a simple mission objective or routine test. Someone had been observing her, tracking her, and now they were calling her out directly. The envelope was both an invitation and a threat. She could feel the familiar thrill of anticipation. Danger had always been her element, and this was the purest form of it yet. She gathered her tools with deliberate care. Lightweight weapons, tactical knife, communication devices disabled, and her survival kit. She wasn't just preparing for a confrontation. She was preparing to vanish into the night, to become the ghost the SEALs had only glimpsed in training exercises and missions. The drive to the coordinates was silent. Emma's car moved swiftly through empty roads, headlights dimmed, radio off, every mirror, every reflective surface scanned for the slightest anomaly. The desert outside the base stretched infinitely, empty and quiet, but Emma knew better. Shadows hid threats, patience concealed danger. When she reached the designated location, a remote warehouse at the edge of a canyon, she parked and exited, moving low and silent across the sand. The night was thick, almost tactile, and every sound carried. Somewhere beyond the ridge, she sensed movement, calculated, deliberate, trained. Inside the warehouse, figures emerged from the shadows. Emma's eyes scanned. Two armed men, both skilled, both poised, both clearly waiting for her. She didn't panic. She had studied patterns like these for years, prepared for the unseen, and thrived in the tension of uncertainty. The confrontation began instantly. The men moved like synchronized predators, attempting to flank her from opposite directions. Emma spun, ducked, and countered with precise strikes, using momentum to neutralize one while keeping the other at bay. Her body moved as a weapon, controlled, deadly, fluid. Despite her skill, she realized this wasn't a test of strength or reflex. It was a test of endurance and intellect. The men adapted, forcing her to anticipate, read, and react faster than ever before. Every corner of the warehouse, every shadow, every surface became part of a chessboard in which she was both pawn and queen. Minutes stretched, tension tight as a wire. The men were formidable, trained to counter attacks, anticipate moves, and exploit weaknesses. But Emma's awareness, honed over years in extreme conditions, gave her the edge. She had anticipated their strategy, studied their pattern, and calculated their timing. With one decisive movement, she disarmed the first operative, sending his weapon clattering across the floor. The second lunged. Emma sidestepped, using the man's momentum to throw him into the wall, dazing him. When the dust settled, both men were incapacitated, alive but neutralized. Emma stood in the center of the warehouse, chest heaving, senses still sharp. She knew the encounter was only a fragment of the challenge ahead. Whoever had sent her here, whoever had been observing her for months, would not be done. The SEALs had no idea. They believed her operations were remarkable but contained, predictable, controlled. They had no inkling that someone had been manipulating, testing, and studying her. That realization sank into Emma's mind, sharpening her awareness and resolve. Suspense hook. Outside the warehouse, a shadow melted into the darkness. A faint camera glinted in the moonlight, recording every moment. Emma Lawson had survived the first true test of betrayal, skill, and cunning. But the real predator was still watching, still waiting. And she knew it would not be long before the next challenge arrived. The night was thick with anticipation, the kind of darkness that seemed to press against your skin, alive with the unknown. Emma Lawson crouched atop a ridge overlooking an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. This was the location she had been instructed to reach, the place where the shadow had called her, where the Watcher had revealed their presence. The air was cold and dry, carrying the scent of rusted metal and dust. Every step Emma had taken to get here had been calculated, silent, deliberate, precise. Her tactical jacket clung to her body, soaked with sweat from previous exertions, but her focus remained absolute. Every muscle was coiled, every sense alive. Through her binoculars, she scanned the perimeter. The compound was heavily fortified, yet seemingly abandoned, lights dimmed, windows darkened, as if daring her to enter. Her instincts screamed at her that someone was inside, waiting, testing, watching. Emma moved closer, slipping through shadows, using every surface, every crevice, every slant of the wall to obscure her presence. She noticed a faint glimmer near one of the doors, laser sight perhaps, or merely a reflection. She adjusted her trajectory, approaching from an angle that minimized exposure. Inside, the building was a maze of corridors, stairwells, and machinery. Pipes groaned under pressure, and the smell of oil and decay filled the air. Emma's movements were fluid, silent, a ghost gliding through a labyrinth. She knew the shadow wasn't just observing, they were anticipating her, setting traps to measure her skill, patience, and resolve. A sudden click echoed faintly behind her, a tripwire. Emma froze, calculating the trajectory, the angle, the likelihood of a second trigger. Her fingers moved deftly, disarming the mechanism without disturbing a single particle of dust. She smiled faintly. Whoever had set this was clever but not infallible. Further down the corridor, a faint light flickered. Emma pressed herself against the wall, blending with shadows. Movement caught the corner of her eye, a figure trained, poised, and deliberate. This was no amateur. The shadow was finally revealed. A man dressed in dark tactical gear, camera glinting faintly at his side, weapon resting lightly in his hands. He spoke, voice low, controlled. "I've been waiting, Lawson. You move well, too well for most." Emma's green eyes met his, calm and unwavering. "And you've been watching too long," she replied, voice steady. "Why draw attention to yourself now?" He smirked, a predator acknowledging its prey. To see if the ghost can become visible, to see if the hunter can become the hunted. The tension between them crackled like electricity. Every micro-expression, every breath, every flick of a finger became a language of intention. Neither moved yet, each assessing the other, each calculating advantage. Then the confrontation began. He lunged with precision, a strike aimed to test her reflexes, her timing, her adaptability. Emma moved fluidly, redirecting his momentum, countering with subtle but devastating strikes that incapacitated him temporarily. He rose quickly, clearly impressed but undeterred. The fight became a dance of strategy and survival. Every corner, every shadow, every inch of floor was part of their battlefield. Emma anticipated, calculated, exploited weaknesses, yet remained cautious. This was no ordinary opponent. Every move he made was deliberate, designed to probe her skill, endurance, and judgment. Hours seemed to compress into minutes. Sweat mingled with dust, muscles burned with exertion, lungs drew in sharp, deliberate breaths. Emma used every technique she had learned over years of combat, survival, and covert operations. She was a phantom, a shadow, a master of stealth and efficiency, but even she recognized the intelligence, patience, and skill of this opponent. Finally, a decisive maneuver. Emma leveraged his momentum, twisting and redirecting him into a stack of crates. He collapsed, dazed but conscious. Emma held her blade at his throat, eyes steady, pulse calm. "Enough," she said. "You wanted to see if I'm visible, you've seen." The man raised his hand slightly, acknowledging defeat without surrender. "Impressive," he admitted. "You're unlike anyone I've encountered. Ghost, shadow, hunter, I can't decide which fits, but I've been tasked with a simple question. Are you an ally or a threat?" Emma lowered the knife slightly but kept her stance defensive. "I am who I am. I operate to protect, to survive, to complete missions. I answer to no one but results." He studied her silently for a moment, then nodded. "Then we are aligned for now. But know this, someone is watching both of us, and they will not wait long to act." Emma's mind processed quickly. This man was part of the network that had been tracking her movements for months, perhaps even from before she joined the SEALs. He was trained, capable, but he was also a messenger, a link to something larger, something more dangerous. She tied him securely, making sure he could not alert others until she was ready. Then she moved to inspect the equipment he had brought: cameras, drones, and tracking devices. Someone with resources, patience, and precision had been studying her, recording every mission, every maneuver, every silent victory. Her pulse remained calm, but a cold realization settled in her chest. The predator had become a puzzle. The observer had become an enigma. And Emma Lawson, unmatched in stealth, skill, and strategy, now faced a threat she had not fully anticipated. Someone who could match her, shadow her, and manipulate every move she made. Exiting the warehouse, Emma disappeared into the night, moving silently across the desert ridges. The man she had subdued remained hidden, her captive but alive. The night seemed alive around her, every shadow a potential hazard, every wind gust a signal. She had confronted the shadow, survived, and gained intelligence, but the larger threat remained. The SEALs, still unaware of this confrontation, continued to operate under the assumption that the desert mission had gone flawlessly. They had no idea that Emma had engaged an unknown, highly skilled operative, neutralized him, and uncovered a network of surveillance and manipulation aimed squarely at her. As Emma paused on a ridge overlooking the city, the wind carrying faint dust and the distant hum of vehicles, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Every mission, every test, every confrontation had brought her here, prepared, alert, unmatched. But now the stakes had escalated. She was no longer merely the ghost in the shadows. She was the hunted, the observed, the target of a network that had resources and patience beyond her experience. Suspense hook. In the distance, atop another ridge, a faint silhouette paused, camera glinting in the moonlight. Someone had observed the confrontation. They had seen her skill, her precision, and her adaptability. Emma Lawson had survived the shadow, but the true predator, the one orchestrating from afar, was still out there. And their next move would come when she least expected it. The night was dense. A black velvet blanket pierced only by the pale glow of the city lights far below. Emma Lawson crouched on the roof of a deserted warehouse at the edge of the industrial district. Months of tracking, stealth missions, and calculated isolation had led her here. Every movement, every decision, every silent victory had brought her to this moment, the culmination of her unseen battles. She wasn't alone. The operative she had subdued in the previous encounter had been cooperative, providing intelligence that revealed the network tracking her. They were not amateurs. They were sophisticated, highly trained, and resourceful. They had orchestrated every observation, every test, every subtle manipulation of her missions. And now, they were converging for what she anticipated would be the final test. Emma adjusted her tactical vest and secured her tools. Night vision goggles scanned the complex below. Multiple entrances, hidden vantage points, and patrol routes were all accounted for. The network had deployed 3 squads, each trained in counter-stealth operations, surveillance, and combat tactics. They would move like a single organism, adaptive and lethal. Her pulse remained steady. This was her environment, chaotic, dangerous, unpredictable, and she thrived in it. Every shadow was a potential ally, every angle a tactical advantage. She didn't hesitate. She descended into the complex, silent as a whisper, moving through ventilation shafts and shadowed corridors with absolute precision. The first confrontation came almost immediately. A team of 4 operatives moved through a corridor, scanning with flashlights and low murmurs. Emma waited in the shadows, timing each strike. 2 incapacitated with silent takedowns, the 3rd redirected into a storage unit, and the 4th barely noticed the slight shift in his path before a precise strike sent him collapsing quietly. Minutes stretched like hours as she moved deeper into the compound. Each confrontation required not only speed and skill but calculation. Traps were everywhere, tripwires, pressure-sensitive alarms, hidden cameras. Emma dismantled them methodically, leaving no trace. Every move was an untraceable fingerprint of skill and experience. Then came the central control room. Lights flickered, sensors hummed, and screens displayed feeds from every angle of the compound. Emma's eyes narrowed. This was the hub. This was where the orchestrator of the network would be. She advanced cautiously, noting movement in the periphery. 2 more operatives blocked the doorway. They moved quickly, but she was faster. A swift feint to the left, a precise strike to neutralize the first, and a controlled counter to disarm the second. Both men crumpled silently. Emma didn't pause. The center of the room was within reach. And there he was, a figure in tactical gear, eyes sharp, posture controlled, observing her calmly from the shadows. The orchestrator. The mind behind every tracking device, every shadowing operation, every subtle test. He raised his hand slightly, almost in acknowledgement. "You've exceeded expectations," he said. His voice was calm, almost casual, yet every syllable carried weight. "I've studied you, anticipated your moves, and yet you're faster, sharper, more precise than I imagined." Emma's green eyes locked on him. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now we see if the ghost can survive when the observer becomes the aggressor." The attack came in a blur. He moved with precision, calculated strikes designed to test her reflexes, her strategy, and her adaptability. Emma countered, twisting, striking, exploiting every angle and weakness. The room became a ballet of controlled violence, each movement choreographed yet unpredictable, each strike and counterstrike a test of skill and endurance. Minutes stretched, hearts raced, adrenaline surged, yet Emma remained calm. She wasn't just surviving, she was controlling the battlefield. Every move was deliberate, every strike calculated, every retreat strategic. Finally, a decisive maneuver. She leveraged his momentum, sending him crashing into a reinforced wall. He rose, dazed but alive, acknowledging her skill. She pressed her knife lightly against his chest, the symbol of her dominance and precision. "Enough," she said, her voice was steady. "The network knows I exist. Now I decide the terms." The man nodded slowly, a mix of respect and calculation in his eyes. Impressive. You've proven what few can: independence, skill, and adaptability. You're unmatched. Emma stepped back, keeping her stance defensive but measured. I operate alone when I must, but I don't underestimate threats, and I never fail to anticipate them. The orchestrator studied her silently. Then, with a nod, he signaled withdrawal. Outside, shadows dispersed, leaving the complex silent once more. Emma remained alert, fully aware that although this encounter had ended, the network still existed, still watched, still waited. She had survived. She had dominated, but the war of shadows was never-ending. Emerging from the complex, Emma moved to a rooftop overlooking the city. The wind whipped her hair across her face, the night alive with sounds of distant traffic, faint sirens, and the occasional flutter of a bird. She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Every mission, every test, every confrontation had led to this: mastery of the unseen, supremacy in the shadows. The SEALs arrived soon after, oblivious to the true extent of her operation. They had seen her actions, but not the confrontation, not the orchestration, not the network she had dismantled and survived. To them, it was another successful mission executed flawlessly. Lieutenant Harris approached, eyes wide. Emma, we didn't know. She smiled faintly, brushing a streak of sweat from her face. You never do. That's the advantage of moving unseen. That's the advantage of being the ghost. He shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and awe. You're in a league of your own. No one could do what you've done. Emma's eyes swept the horizon. No one sees it coming until it's over. The night deepened, darkness folding around her. She was untouchable, unseen, unstoppable. The SEALs would never fully comprehend her skill, her precision, or her independence. She was the variable they couldn't predict, the ghost they couldn't see, the operative who operated in darkness. Suspense hook resolution. Somewhere far above the city, in a skyscraper across town, another observer watched the events unfold through high-resolution feeds. Their face was unreadable, but the faintest smile crossed their lips. Emma Lawson had proven herself, but the game of shadows had only just begun, and the ghost, now fully revealed, would be ready for whatever came next. The city slept oblivious. The ghost moved unseen, and somewhere in the shadows the next challenge waited, patient, calculating, inevitable.